If you have the habit of making poor decisions during matches and you're just giving your opponent too many simple points, maybe you're just trying to go too big too soon, or maybe you get pulled out wide and instead of doing the percentage thing, getting a bit more spin on the ball, getting a bit more height on the ball, getting it back cross court to give yourself time to recover, you cannot resist that 1 in 10 outrageous winner down the line, then this video is for you. I'm going to be helping you to improve your decision making. So we're going to be talking about why potentially you're not making the right decision even though you know what you're supposed to do. I'm going to give you some simple training drills to help work on the situation. I hope you find the video helpful. If you do, it'd be great if you give me the thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel before, really appreciate it if you could do that as well. In a moment, we're going to talk about a couple of different ways that you can train to improve your decision making and going through some specific drills. But I just want to start by giving you a little bit of an understanding, because ultimately decision making is controlled by certain parts of your brain, and if you repeatedly make poor decisions, hit shots that you know you shouldn't be going for, it points to these parts of the brain. Now, I'm not talking about poor tactical awareness. If you don't know what shots you should be going for, in what situations and what shots you can execute consistently, then that's a whole different story. Here we're talking about repeatedly doing things that you know that you shouldn't be doing because they're not in your best interest in terms of the results of the match. So if that's happening, we're talking about either the function of the parts of the brain, the kind of mainly the frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex that deal with decision making, or we're talking about energy utilization, getting enough energy to these parts of the brain, because in order to think, in order to make good decisions, we need to get blood, we need to get oxygen, we need to get glucose, and we need to get ATP to the front parts of the brain so that you can continue to make good decisions during matches. So we're going to be going through a couple of different types of training and working on some specific drills, and then at the end I'm going to talk about kind of slightly deeper things that you might need to work on to potentially address the energy utilization issue. The first thing that you can do to train and improve your decision making is very simple and very obvious, but I find most players don't actually do it, and that is to intentionally try and improve your decision making, to actually practice it. A lot of players focus on improving their forehand technique, but they don't focus on improving their mental techniques. But we need to approach things in exactly the same way. You have to very deliberately plan to make better decisions and then evaluate yourself on the decisions that you make. It takes energy and it takes concentration, just like improving any technique. But if you're playing, say, a practice match, instead of thinking, okay, I'm going to try and hit 70% of my first serves in, it could be, okay, I'm going to try and increase the percentage of good decisions I make. So when I get into specific positions, I'm going to try and make better decisions. And that can be something that you kind of visualize before the match. If you know there's scenarios where you have bad habits of making poor decisions, kind of mentally rehearse and visualize making good decisions within those situations. And then when you're out on court, evaluate yourself based on what you do. If you make a poor decision, go, okay, shouldn't have done that. This is the shot that I could have gone for, and be very deliberate and conscious about trying to improve your decision making, because obviously training that is training the parts of the brain that we're talking about. It's going to be a first and important step, and it can take you a very long way. Just understand that it's going to take a little bit of work and a little bit of practice, just like improving anything else. You don't change your serve technique or your forehand technique and it sticks in a match 2 weeks later. You have to work on it for a period of time, gain enough repetitions until it's going to stick. And it's going to be exactly the same in decision making. The more times you allow yourself to make bad decisions, the more it's going to happen. But the more times you kind of force yourself, demand of yourself that you make better decisions, the more times that is going to happen. So it's a really important part of it, but there can be other things that you might need to work on because of the stuff that I mentioned earlier, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Now we're going to work on a few different drills to target the parts of the brain that are responsible for decision making. Now there's a lot of different ways that we could do this, but one of the biggest windows that we've got is going to be training different types of eye movements, because our eye movements are in large part controlled by this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. So the first drill that we're going to do is an eye switching exercise. The simple version, I'm just going to hold 2 targets out in front, so I'm just looking at my thumbnails, switching between my thumbnails, trying to keep my head nice and still, trying to make accurate eye switches. I'm not sure how well you can see my eyes because the sun is out and I might be squinting, but I'm trying to keep my head still and then moving my eyes between the targets. Now we want to do this in different directions, horizontally, vertically, diagonally as a minimum, but we also want to challenge and train and improve this over time. So training these brain areas is like training anything else. I'm starting out nice and basic. I've got a big visual target of my thumb. I start out with a few reps, maybe 10, 20 switches in each direction, but over time I want to try and work on maybe looking at smaller targets, work on making more switches, work on making faster switches, work on using things at different distances to really challenge these parts of the brain and improve their level of function over time. And if you do that, in addition to the deliberate practice of trying to make better decisions on court, it can be a really effective way to improve your decision making. The next drill that we're going to do is kind of the opposite of what we've just done. Instead of making fast eye switches, we're going to be resisting making eye switches. We're going to try and focus our eyes on a specific target and hold it there for a period of time. So gaze stabilization or gaze fixation. Now our eyes' natural tendencies are to make little movements. They're actually constantly making movements. So by deliberately trying to hold them in one position, we're training the skill of inhibition, of stopping ourselves doing something, like stopping ourselves going for a shot that we shouldn't be going for. In terms of the training, really simple, but this time I like to use a smaller visual target. There's lots of things you could use, but I like to use these free Snellen chart apps, just have different size letters on, so then you can choose the smallest letter that you can see clearly and hold it in position. And then I'm going to work on maybe 5-10 seconds, focusing on one of the letters, and if my eyes want to move away, I resist that temptation and really try and keep my visual clarity looking at that target. And this is something that we want to work on in different positions. So out in front, down, up, left, right, different diagonals, just lots of different positions, trying to hold our focus very still. Now, this is the opposite of what we've just done before. So potentially you might benefit more from focusing on this, or you might benefit more from focusing on the saccades, because they operate in slightly different ways. Now there are assessments that we can do to try and figure out which ones are going to be more beneficial, but I'll talk about that more later on. This is the second drill. Again, very effective way to improve decision making if you're also practicing the skill of making better decisions. The next drill that we're going to do to target this part of the brain is going to be using an app. We're going to work on a game called the Stroop Effect. You can get free apps for the iPhone, you can get free apps for Android, but this is something that's been well researched for targeting these parts of the brain, because the app that looks a little bit like this is going to present you with words written in a specific color, and then it's going to present you with different choices, and it's basically going to try and trick you into pressing the wrong choice, and you have to override that trick and you have to choose the other option. So it really trains your ability to inhibit and do things that you shouldn't be doing, like going for crazy shots that you shouldn't be going for at a specific point in the rally. So this is the Stroop Effect, and it's going to be another very effective way to train the parts of the brain that are responsible for decision making. Okay, so far we've looked at the deliberate practice of training decision making, and we've done 3 different drills to kind of target parts of the brain that are responsible for decision making. Between those, they can be extremely beneficial, especially if you progress the training over time. But as I mentioned earlier, sometimes there can be an energy utilization issue. And here's where we have to get a little bit deep in terms of the neuro stuff. In order to get oxygen and glucose to the front part of the brain so it can do its job, it has to go up and it has to go forwards. So it has to go through a whole bunch of different brain areas before it can get to the front part. And what this comes down to is if the parts of the brain at the back and the bottom aren't working as efficiently as they can, it basically burns through energy so that there's less left over to make good decisions. Now at the back part of the brain, we do a lot of visual processing. In these kind of slightly in between parts, we deal with a lot of balance, then we deal with movement and sensation. So we basically deal with all the stuff that's happening on the tennis court, because when you're moving around court, when you're doing all the things that are required in tennis, we're challenging all of these different parts of the brain before we get to the decision making. So if these parts of the brain aren't as efficient as they could be, the movement, the vision, the balance, it's literally, you're going to burn through energy, leaving less left over for decision making. And if you're the sort of player that really struggles with decision making when you get a little bit more tired, it suggests that this could be going on, but it could still be going on even if you start making poor decisions right at the start of the match. But potentially you might need to do work on these underlying brain areas to improve their function and efficiency, to really allow enough energy to get through to the front parts of the brain so that you can make better decisions. And there's all sorts of different assessments that we can do to try and figure out what you might need to target, and there's different training drills to help you improve function in each of these areas. Now, this is one of the big things that I help tennis players with, using brain-based training to improve underlying function so that you can play better quality tennis. If that's something you'd like to learn more about, I've created a free masterclass to go into a little bit more detail. I'll place a link up there, and I'll place a link down there in the description so you can check it out. It'll explain more about brain-based training, and if you sign up for that free masterclass, at the end of it, it's also going to tell you a little bit about my program and how I work with players. And then if you're interested in potentially working together, it'll talk about the next steps involved. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got a lot out of it. Hope you're going to try some of these drills. If you try them, I'd love to hear how you get on. Leave me a comment down below, and I'll catch you next time.